In the dusty streets of Deadwood, South Dakota, 1876, nobody paid attention to Samuel "Sam" Hayes. The 23-year-old drifter worked odd jobs around town, mucking stables and hauling supplies for pennies. His weathered clothes and quiet demeanor made him invisible to most folks. They saw just another down-on-his-luck wanderer trying to scrape by in the rough frontier town. But Sam carried secrets deeper than the abandoned mine shafts that scarred the Black Hills. His past was buried beneath layers of shame and regret, hidden behind eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. The first hook came on a Tuesday morning when old-timer Jake Morrison burst into Sullivan's saloon, gasping for breath. His face was pale as winter snow, and his hands shook like autumn leaves. "There's something out there," he wheezed, pointing toward the hills. "Something that ain't natural. I seen tracks bigger than a grizzly's, but shaped all wrong. And there was this sound, like nothing God ever intended." The saloon fell silent. Even the piano player stopped mid-tune. Jake Morrison had been trapping these hills for 30 years. If something spooked him, it was worth listening to. Sam looked up from his corner table where he'd been nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His fingers tightened around the ceramic mug. He'd heard stories like this before, back when he rode with the cavalry. Stories that most folks dismissed as frontier tall tales. But Sam knew better. He'd seen things during his military service that the Army preferred to keep buried in official reports that would never see daylight. The second hook dropped 3 days later when Martha Kellerman's prize bull was found dead. Not just dead, but torn apart with a precision that defied explanation. The massive animal had been gutted with surgical accuracy, its organs removed and arranged in patterns that made the town doctor physically sick. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran named Thomas Bridger, stood over the carcass with a bewildered expression. In 20 years of law enforcement, he'd never seen anything like it. Sam approached the scene quietly, his boots barely making a sound on the packed earth. He knelt beside the remains, studying the cuts and the strange symbols carved into nearby trees. His military training kicked in automatically, cataloging details that others missed. The positioning of the organs, the depth of the cuts, the deliberate nature of the mutilation. This wasn't random violence. This was ritual. This was message. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, Sam made his way to the edge of town where an old Lakota man named Joseph Running Bear had set up a modest camp. Most townspeople avoided the elderly Native American, viewing him with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. The tensions between settlers and the Lakota people had been running high ever since Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn just months earlier. But Sam had noticed something others missed. Running Bear wasn't just any old warrior. The way he carried himself, the respect other Native Americans showed him when they passed through town, the intricate beadwork on his medicine pouch. This man held significant status among his people. Running Bear looked up as Sam approached, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering campfire. "You see what others cannot," the old man said in accented but clear English. "The signs are written in the earth, but white eyes are blind to their meaning." Sam settled down across from the fire, noting how Running Bear's weathered face seemed carved from the same stone as the Black Hills themselves. "Tell me about the patterns," Sam said quietly. "The arrangement of the organs, the symbols on the trees. What do they mean?" Running Bear studied him for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Finally, he reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a small carved bone, etched with symbols that matched those found at the crime scene. "My grandfather gave this to me before he crossed to the spirit world," Running Bear explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "He told me stories of the Shadow Walker, an ancient evil that feeds on fear and chaos. The symbols are a calling card, a way of marking territory. But there's something more. The Shadow Walker doesn't act alone, corrupts others, turns them into servants. The bull was not the first victim. There will be more." Sam felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. He'd encountered similar entities during his military service, though he'd never heard them called by that name. "How do you stop something like that?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Running Bear's expression grew grave. You don't stop the shadow walker. You can only contain it, bind it to a specific place where it cannot spread. But the ritual requires great sacrifice. It requires someone willing to give everything to protect others. My people have stories of warriors who made such sacrifices. They are remembered as heroes, though few understand what they truly gave up. The next morning brought news that sent the town into a panic. 3 more animals had been found dead, each one mutilated in the same ritualistic manner. But worse, Mary Patterson, the schoolteacher's daughter, had gone missing during the night. Her bedroom window had been found open, and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. Sheriff Bridger organized search parties, but Sam could see the fear in the men's eyes. They were dealing with something beyond their understanding, and they knew it. The bravest among them would venture a few miles into the hills before turning back, claiming they'd heard strange sounds or seen shadows moving against the natural flow of light. Sam knew he had to act. His military past had prepared him for situations that defied conventional logic. During his service with the 7th Cavalry, before Custer's final campaign, he'd been part of a classified unit that investigated what the Army euphemistically called unusual frontier incidents. He'd seen things that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. Creatures that existed between the physical and spiritual realms. Entities that fed on human fear and suffering. That night, against all logic and self-preservation, Sam ventured alone into the Black Hills. He carried his service revolver, a silver-bladed knife that had been blessed by a Cheyenne medicine man, and the knowledge that he might not return. The hills seemed to breathe around him, shadows shifting in ways that defied the moonlight. Every sound was amplified, every movement suspect. He found Mary Patterson in a clearing 3 miles from town, unconscious but alive, surrounded by the same ritualistic symbols that had marked the animal killings. But she wasn't alone. Standing over her was something that had once been human but had been twisted into something else entirely. The creature retained a vaguely human shape, but its limbs were elongated, its fingers ending in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding stone. "You should not have come here, soldier," it hissed, somehow knowing about Sam's military background. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The Shadow Walker has chosen this place, and soon all will serve in darkness." The creature lunged with inhuman speed, but Sam was ready. His years of military training took over, muscle memory guiding his movements. He rolled aside, drawing his revolver and firing 3 quick shots center mass. The bullets struck home but had no visible effect. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and struck back with claws that left deep gouges in the tree behind where Sam had been standing. This wasn't going to be one with conventional weapons. Sam drew the blessed silver knife, feeling its weight in his hand. The metal seemed to pulse with its own energy, responding to the supernatural threat. The battle that followed was unlike anything from Sam's military experience. The creature was fast and strong, but it seemed to be testing him rather than trying to kill him immediately. As they fought, it spoke of plans and purposes, of a darkness that would spread across the frontier if not stopped. Sam began to understand that this wasn't just about Deadwood. This was about something much larger, a corruption that could spread from town to town if it wasn't contained here and now. Finally, Sam managed to drive the silver blade deep into the creature's chest. It let out a shriek that seemed to shake the very hills themselves, then dissolved into shadow and dust. But even as it died, Sam could feel something else watching from the darkness. The real Shadow Walker. The creature he'd killed had been just a servant, a harbinger. Sam gathered the unconscious Mary and began the long journey back to town. But he knew his work was far from finished. The Shadow Walker itself was still out there, and it would not be defeated by silver blades and courage alone. He needed help, and he knew where to find it. The next day, Sam sought out Running Bear again. The old man was waiting for him, as if he'd expected Sam's return. "You faced the servant," Running Bear said without preamble. "But now comes the true test. The Shadow Walker knows you are a threat. It will not underestimate you again. What do I need to do?" Sam asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Running Bear studied him with those ancient eyes, seeing something in Sam's face that perhaps Sam himself didn't fully understand yet. "There is a way," the old man said slowly, "but it requires great sacrifice. You must gather warriors, not just white soldiers but Lakota as well. The Shadow Walker can only be defeated by united strength, by putting aside old hatred and fighting for something greater than ourselves." "But the cost?" Running Bear trailed off, shaking his head. "Tell me," Sam insisted. "Whatever the cost, it can't be worse than letting this thing spread." Running Bear reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a small leather scroll, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move in the firelight. "This contains the binding ritual," he explained, "but it requires a willing sacrifice from someone who has faced the darkness and emerged unchanged. Someone who can serve as an anchor point, holding the Shadow Walker in one place while the warriors complete the binding. That person does not survive the ritual." Sam felt the weight of those words settle over him like a burial shroud. He'd suspected something like this might be required, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that chilled him to the bone. Yet he also felt a strange sense of peace. His life had been drifting without purpose since leaving the military. Perhaps this was why he'd ended up in Deadwood, why he'd been the one to save Mary Patterson. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Running Bear consulted the stars, performing calculations that drew on knowledge passed down through generations. 3 days, he said finally. "On the third night, when the moon is dark, the Shadow Walker will complete its transformation. After that, it will be too powerful to bind. It will begin spreading its influence, corrupting everything it touches." Sam nodded grimly. 3 days to convince a town full of people who barely tolerated each other to work together against a supernatural threat they couldn't fully understand. The next morning, Sam did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He stood up in the middle of Sullivan's saloon and began to speak. Not the quiet, hesitant words of the drifter they thought they knew, but with the authoritative voice of a military officer who'd seen combat and lived to tell about it. "I know most of you don't know me," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet saloon. "I'm just the guy who mucks your stables and hauls your supplies. But I'm also former Sergeant Samuel Hayes, 7th Cavalry, and I've seen things that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams." He told them about the creature in the hills, about the Shadow Walker and the ritual that could stop it. He spoke of the need to work with Running Bear and any Lakota warriors who would join them. The reaction was about what he'd expected. Some laughed outright, dismissing his words as the ravings of a man who'd spent too long in the sun. Others grew angry, particularly at the suggestion of working with Native Americans. But Sheriff Bridger stepped forward, his weathered face grim. "I've seen those mutilated animals," he said quietly. "I've seen the symbols carved into the trees. And I've been a lawman long enough to know when something ain't natural." His support gave Sam's words weight they wouldn't have had otherwise. Dr. Morrison, the town's physician, nodded reluctantly. "I examined those animal remains," he added. "The precision of the cuts, the arrangement of the organs. It's not the work of any wild animal I've ever encountered." Slowly, others began to speak up. Martha Kellerman mentioned strange sounds in the night, livestock behaving erratically. Jake Morrison described his encounter in more detail, the unnatural tracks and the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. By the end of the day, Sam had convinced about 30 men to join his cause. It wasn't many, but it was a start. The real test would come when he tried to reach out to the Lakota. He knew Running Bear could serve as an intermediary, but would his people be willing to fight alongside white settlers who had taken their land and killed their buffalo? That evening, Running Bear led Sam to a hidden valley 5 miles north of town. There, around a sacred fire, sat more than 20 Lakota warriors. Their faces were painted for war, and their weapons gleamed in the firelight. At their head sat a man Sam recognized from army descriptions, though he'd never seen him in person. It was Crazy Horse himself, the legendary war chief who had helped defeat Custer at Little Bighorn. Years later, when historians would write about the settling of the Black Hills, Most would focus on the gold rushes and the conflicts with Native Americans. But those who knew the truth would remember the 3 days when a drifter named Sam Hayes proved that heroism often comes from the most unexpected places, and that the greatest victories sometimes require the ultimate sacrifice. The stone marker still stands today, weathered by time but unbroken. Local legends say that on quiet nights, you can still feel Sam's presence there, standing eternal watch to ensure that the Shadow Walker never again threatens the innocent. It serves as a reminder that true heroism isn't about fame or recognition, but about the willingness to stand up when others cannot, to sacrifice when others will not, and to bring people together when everything else tries to tear them apart. In the end, Samuel Hayes got exactly what he'd always wanted without knowing it. He was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. He had become something far greater than fame could offer. He had become legend. The legend of Samuel Hayes spread far beyond the Black Hills, carried by the warriors who fought beside him and the settlers whose lives he saved. In the years that followed, the stone marker became a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand what true sacrifice meant. Travelers would come from across the territories, drawn by stories of the forgotten drifter who had united sworn enemies against an ancient evil. Running Bear lived to be 93. Spending his final decades as the guardian of Sam's resting place. He would tell visitors about the 3 days that changed everything, how a man with no reputation had earned the respect of the greatest Lakota war chief of his generation. The old medicine man often said that Sam's greatest victory wasn't defeating the Shadow Walker, but proving that courage and honor transcended the boundaries that divided people. Sheriff Thomas Bridger served Deadwood for 20 more years, but he never forgot the lesson Sam had taught him. He worked tirelessly to maintain the peaceful relationship between the town and the local tribes, often saying that Sam Hayes had shown him what real law enforcement looked like. When conflicts arose, Bridger would ask himself what Sam would have done, and the answer always led him toward justice rather than vengeance. Crazy Horse himself spoke of Sam during treaty negotiations in the following years. He would tell government officials about the white man who had kept his word even unto death, who had fought beside Lakota warriors as an equal. The war chief's testimony helped secure better terms for his people in several agreements. As negotiators recognized the power of such unprecedented cooperation, Mary Patterson, the schoolteacher's daughter Sam had rescued, grew up to become a teacher herself. She established the first integrated school in the region, where settler children and Native American youth learned together. Above the entrance, she placed a simple plaque that read, "In memory of Samuel Hayes, who taught us that our differences make us stronger when we stand together." The fertile ground around Sam's marker became a symbol of healing that extended far beyond its physical boundaries. Families who had lost members in conflicts between settlers and tribes would come to lay flowers there, finding peace in the knowledge that their loved one's sacrifice had meaning when viewed through Sam's example. The site became neutral ground where former enemies could meet and remember their shared humanity. Dr. Morrison documented the entire encounter in detailed medical reports that were quietly filed away by military authorities. Though the official records remained classified, Morrison's private journals eventually found their way into historical archives. Future researchers would puzzle over his descriptions of supernatural entities and impossible wounds that healed themselves, but the consistency of his account with other testimonies lent credibility to the extraordinary events. Martha Kellerman, whose bull had been the first victim, donated land adjacent to the marker for a small chapel that welcomed people of all faiths. She said Sam had shown her that evil could unite people faster than good if they weren't careful, but that choosing to stand together against darkness was what made civilization worth preserving. The chapel still holds services today, and Sam's story is retold every year on the anniversary of the final battle. The alliance between Deadwood and the local tribes lasted for generations, creating a model of cooperation that other frontier communities tried to emulate. Trade flourished, knowledge was shared, and conflicts that might have erupted into violence were resolved through dialogue. Visitors often remarked that there was something different about the region, a sense of mutual respect that seemed almost supernatural in its strength. Running Bear's teachings about recognizing supernatural threats were passed down through both Lakota tradition and settler folklore. The combined knowledge proved valuable on several later occasions when similar entities appeared in other territories. The techniques developed during the Shadow Walker incident became part of an informal network of frontier defenders, though most never realized they were carrying on Sam's legacy. Modern archaeologists studying the site have found evidence of the ancient ritual, though they struggle to explain the precision of the stonework and the unusual mineral compositions found in the soil. The marker itself appears to have been carved with tools that leave microscopic patterns unlike anything from the 1870s, leading to theories about advanced Native American techniques that were lost to history. Children in the region grow up hearing Sam's story as a bedtime tale, though most versions focus on the adventure rather than the sacrifice. Parents use it to teach lessons about standing up for others and looking past surface differences to find common ground. The tale has been adapted countless times, but the core message remains unchanged. True heroism often comes from unexpected places and requires giving more than you think you have to give. Every year on the anniversary of Sam's sacrifice, representatives from dozens of tribes and settler communities gather at the stone marker for a ceremony of remembrance. They share stories, renew friendships, and promise to honor his memory by continuing to work together despite their differences. It's become one of the longest-running peace celebrations in American history. The stone marker itself has never required repair or maintenance, despite decades of harsh weather and the passage of countless visitors. Local geologists have studied its composition extensively but cannot explain how it remains unchanged by time. Some say it's the power of the binding ritual. Others believe it's Sam's spirit keeping watch. Whatever the explanation, it stands as a testament to the idea that some sacrifices echo through eternity. Perhaps most importantly, Sam's story reminds us that history's greatest heroes are often its most forgotten citizens. He was never a famous general or a celebrated explorer. He was simply a man who chose to do what was right when the moment demanded it, regardless of the personal cost. In a world that often celebrates fame over character, Sam Hayes represents the quiet courage that truly shapes the course of human events. His legacy lives on not in monuments or museums, but in the countless small acts of courage performed by ordinary people who choose to stand up when others cannot, to bridge divides when others build walls, and to sacrifice for the greater good when others serve only themselves. In that sense, Samuel Hayes never really died at all. He lives on in every person who chooses hope over fear, unity over division, and service over self.